What's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this is going to be video part 1 of 3, or I guess technically 4 if we end up doing a Night Fae one, of a series I'm going to be covering, talking about each covenant for Warlocks heading into patch 9.1 and Chains of Domination. Now, in case you guys didn't see my most recent video, I did indeed swap from Night Fae to Necrolord. The reason behind it being that I want to have Renown 40 with each covenant before 9.1 actually drops, in case they buff covenants, change conduits, whatever would have you, making it more valuable to be Night Fae, or to be Necrolord over Night Fae, or whatever covenant there is. Now, I will indeed be going back Night Fae at the end of this. I'm assuming it's probably going to take 5 or so days at a semi-casual kind of pace to finish leveling Necrolord, Venthyr, and Kyrian from 0 to 40. But I can say that I do indeed have Necrolord at Renown 34, I think, right about now, give or take. I did indeed unlock Bonesmith before raid this week, and we ran a handful of keys with it as well. So I have a pretty good feeling, I feel, on how the Covenant plays in Mythic Plus in raiding for each spec, and really just want to give my opinion on the current state of it, with Decimating Bolt being its main ability. I enjoyed it a good bit, but there are some things also probably need to be changed a little bit. Now we're going to start off talking about the Soulbinds, going into the Conduit, I guess the Covenant Conduit ability, then get into a spec by spec breakdown, looking at just sims briefly and talking about just the interactions of Decimating Bolt, how easy it is to play with in certain settings, how relevant it is in certain settings, and then some changes that I hope to see heading into patch 9.1. Any weak ORS profiles or add-ons you see here, you can grab for free off my Twitch if you want to swing by, hang out, ask any questions anytime. Feel free to do so. With that being said, I also want to give a quick shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so much for the support, guys. With 9.1 PTR starting up in assumingly actually any day at this point, I will be creating a 9.1 Warlock spreadsheet similar to the 9.01 that I created as well. If you would like early access to that, the tier 3 Felguard rank or higher of my Patreon does indeed get that ahead of the public release schedule. Thanks for watching, guys. Let's start off with the Necrolord Soulbinds. Okay, I forgot to talk about briefly how strong Fleshcraft, the Universal Covenant ability, actually is for Necrolord now compared to where it was in 9.0. For those of you who are familiar with it, Fleshcraft was changed in 9.0.5. The actual channel has been reduced from 4 seconds to 3 seconds. The actual absorption shield effect has been doubled from 20 to 40, and this has been changed. Now, when you're channeling, you take 20% reduced damage now, at least as far as what shows for me in game, down from 30. But still, they've doubled the actual shield effect, which is really strong, and even though it's on a 2-minute cooldown, the effect is still really powerful. This saved me multiple times, like literally on Enerva, on Sun Legion Generals last night, in our actual prog. The shield just passively, it's 18,000 damage, which is really high, and it lasts for actual 2 minutes. Now, I don't know the current state of their mindset on Fleshcraft heading into 9.1. The shield is very strong though, and the fact that this is a universal ability for a Covenant, I'd say Door of Shadows is solid for Venthyr, and the Kyrian ability, I don't know what the Kyrian ability is, the Vial is solid too. But outside of having a soul shape utility and the movement and everything that it brings, Fleshcraft has actually been really strong. I've been impressed with it universally. Moving on to the Soulbinds though, so there are a couple of relevant abilities. So there basically is one for each here. Plague Divisor number 1 has Volatile Solvent. Fleshcraft's passive effect consumes a corpse essence nearby, granting a benefit based on the creature's type. So technically what this does, this is what I've been able to find for different creature types: humanoid, aberration, beast, demon. Apparently the effect was changed to 2 minutes, but still persists if the shield has been consumed now. It's a small mastery increase, armor, primary stats, stamina, crit, magic damage. So there is a pretty good chance you're getting some kind of DPS increase tied to this. And hey, if you're playing a Demonology Warlock, why not suck up some demons and get a larger stamina increase? But as far as outside of Volatile Solvent goes, for the first Soulbind we have here, there's not really anything that's like a tremendous DPS boost or anything. You have your Potency Conduit here, which means you don't get access to Plague's Preemptive Strike. Moving down the tree here, you're rocking to a Potency, and the final one is Ultimate Form, which is basically just a health regen and an immune to CC. Now, it can be relevant, but as far as like throughput and things go, this is sort of similar to Pod Tender, I feel like, for Night Fae. But the thing with Pod Tender is you have it on the first row, and then you have Field of Blossoms along with 2 Potency Conduits as the second Soulbind of choice. So not incredibly impressed with Plague Divisor or Marileft's actual abilities here. Comparing this to Nia for a Night Fae is a dramatic difference between the two. Nia has Grove Invigoration tied to your 1 minute CD with Soul Rot. She has Burrs if you need it. It's night and day between this and Nia. Many has Lead by Example. So It says Decimating Bolt increases your intellect by 5% and up to 4 nearby allies' primary stat by 2 for 7.5 seconds. You gain an additional 2% intellect for each ally affected. This actually made me, when I was playing Affliction as Necrolord, which we'll get to in a little bit here, I was not incredibly impressed. This actually made me want to... The opener for AF is sort of annoying as Necrolord, and the actual maintenance of Shadow's Embrace is even worse as Necrolord, because you want to have your buff Drain Soul go off when you have a 3-stack of Shadow's Embrace, but typically you want to have Lead by Example up for your Rapture window as well, because it's an intellect buff, and Rapture is where you do most of your damage. Keep in mind, you don't have Soul Rot, you have just Decimating Bolt, which is a 45-second cooldown, just like Phantom Singularity is. So you have this 7.5-second window to essentially try and dump all of your Raptures and then dump your Drain Soul, which is really hard to do, especially when you're trying to maintain Shadow's Embrace as well. So you refresh your dots, get Shadow's Embrace up, go Decimating Bolt, Singularity, try and Rapture to get all the bonus intellect damage in, and then finish off with your Drain to refresh Shadow's Embrace, and then go from there. The problem is that I feel like the duration on Lead by Example is a bit too short. If it was like 10 or so seconds, I think it'd be fine. It is tied to a 45-second ability, but still, it's not a massive increase that we're looking at, say, looking at Grove Invigoration with Soul Rot, for example. Once again, the cooldown's a little shorter, but still, I think Lead by Example's duration could quite easily be increased, maybe potentially with a small stat nerf, but once again, Lead by Example is not, you know, just miles and miles ahead of anything else. Looking at many sims, which we'll get to in a minute here, they're not bad, but this is not Grove Invigoration. This is not, you know, Soul Rot 2.0. It feels sort of lackluster. You also have access to Gnashing Chompers here, but this is tied to an Endurance Conduit. So you basically go double potency, being potency, and then you have Grizzle Toes, which is just a movement speed increase. So it's fine, but once again, just nowhere near as strong as Nia is for Night Fae. Bone Smith is an interesting one as well. So you have Forgeborn Reveries, which gives you a small intellect increase. You have Potency Conduit here, and then if you go down, you have the choice of either Potency here, attached to Gore Stompers, which is a movement speed increase, or you have an Endurance Conduit attached to Marrow Gemstone. Now, Marrow Gemstone is very strong because, number one, crit damage increase, just good in general, but Destruction's already good with Necrolord, we know that. Decimating Bolt is the best when you're playing Destro, and a crit strike increase directly makes those hit harder if they crit. It also directly increases Chaos Bolt's damage because Chaos Bolt always critically strikes, and its damage is further increased by your critical strike chance. So Bonesmith is a real option when it comes to Destro. The issue that I ran into is that you can't really control the actual Marrow Gemstone window, and there is, as we can see here, a cooldown being once per 60 seconds. At times on pull, I had multiple crits back to back to back. If we're playing Channel Demon Fire, it stacked so incredibly fast, but then at times I had it proc at a point where I didn't really have Decimating Bolt ready, I didn't really have my Ruby or my Dark Soul ready, and I'm just casting Incinerates and a random Chaos Bolt into a semi-weak Chaos or critical strike damage window with Gemstone. So I feel like consistency wise, Ameni was also there when we played it very briefly for Destro, because you can still get Lead by Example, you can get Ashen Remains, and you can even slot in, well, if you really want to play Combusting Engine, or you can play Infernal Brand, which is not as good. Then again, the Conduit's not an actual nightmare to play with. But just Soulbind wise, I don't think they're anywhere near as strong as the 3 Night Fae ones. You've got Nia once again with the Grove Invigoration. You've got Dreamweaver, double potency. You also got Field of Blossoms tied to it. And even when it comes to Korain in the final slot for Night Fae, you have Wild Hunt Tactics and you have First Strike, which leads to a lot of insane cheese you can do at times, albeit most of the time with Destro, but even Demo and Af have played Korain in a few settings I've seen. I just don't think there's as much reach as far as Night Fae Soulbinds really go here. The one conduit here that Necrolord has as well is called Fatal Decimation. Decimating Bolt's missiles deal 80% increased damage. This conduit initially in beta was very, very different. So Decimating Bolt for Destro and Demo, and Af if you're playing Shadow Bolt and not Drain Soul, gives you 3 stacks of an increased damage effect to your Incinerate, to your Shadow Bolt for Demo, and it's Demon Bolt for Demo, and to your Shadow Bolt for Af if you're not playing Drain Soul. But if you're playing Drain Soul's Af, it's only 1 stack. On beta, this conduit, I believe, had like a 20-ish% chance to not consume a stack of Decimating Bolt, which when Drain Soul was at 3 stacks and had a much higher percentage damage increase from actual Decimating Bolt was utterly insane. It was incredible. I believe it was like 20% or so. Then they nerfed it to like 5%, and it was still really good because those drain souls hit so incredibly hard when you have Malefic Wrath. When you had the full damage effect being baseline 200%, you can see on the tooltip here, it was nerfed to 100. In beta, it was 200 to 400. When you had that stacked with Malefic Wrath, when you had it just execute with Drain Soul's baseline damage increase and the Conduit proccing, your damage was really, really insane. It makes sense that it was nerfed, but it sort of seems like this version of Fatal Decimation was just like, we don't know what we're doing, just increase the damage of the effect and move on. You can have a Decimating Bolt. You don't get twice the amount of stacks, and the cast time and the damage increase, the cast time of Decimating Bolt in a Havoc window, while also taking into account the damage increase, is just not worth it, in my opinion. Typically, you can just cast it before your Havoc window, have some Havoc Incinerates that are buffed by it, and then launch Chaos Bolts and squeeze in Conflict Rates. We don't have Rolling Havoc around anymore, but still, casting a spell like this in a Havoc window that's roughly 2 seconds is not very exciting. I think the Necrolord Soulbinds could indeed use a bit of work, albeit I think they are a bit better than the Venthyr ones, universally looking at all three, and the same goes for Kyrian, but I don't think they really can hold a candle to the Night Fae Soulbinds. And now when I say that, I don't mean that they're necessarily terrible. It's just, if you look at Sims here, once again, we'll get to the Destro ones. We know that Bonesmith's good for Destro. I get that. We know that. We'll get to it. Looking at Affliction here, this is Renown 35. As high as Blood Mallet Sims can go. Once again, it's Blood Mallet. You should always sim with your own character profile, your own Soulbinds, your own Conduit levels. Look at Afflock here, man. Look at Afflock for Necrolord. Bonesmith is here. If we full screen this, we're looking at about 6,288 damage. Look at Nia, 6,637. And the crazy thing is, I believe this was before the 1-minute APL was added to raid bots. I'm not 100%, but when I simmed my character, before I swapped the Necrolord's AF, I was 6,700 damage. I am 6,030 damage now as Necrolord. I lost about 650 damage. Meaningful choice, right? Play what you want, right? Yeah, unless you want to live in the dumpster and do no damage. Necrolord really needs help as far as Affliction is concerned. Now, we'll get to the actual ability and Decimating Bolt and the changes here for AF I want, or like in a minute, but the disparity here is just actually incredible. Looking at Nia, even Khorane and Dreamweaver, they're pretty close. They're within 5 DPS of each other or so, roughly. You've got Pelagos up here, but this is Pelagos in single target. If you go to 3 target, I mean, it gets even worse. Well, like, I don't know how you can do it here. When you go to 3 target, it gets even worse. You literally, or I guess Hectic Agli, for example, like, it's even further ahead. And look at how low Necrolord is here. This is because it affects Drain Soul. It doesn't affect any kind of relevant ability in AoE. You can see Ameni is a little higher here, maybe because of Lead by Example, Bonesmith's crit ability, and just stronger in general. But it's just Nia so far ahead with Grove Immigration, with Soul Rot hitting 3-4 targets. You can even see Venthyr in like AoE applications is not terrible, and Pelagos is up here too. But Necrolord just so far behind as far as Affliction is concerned. It really needs help. Looking at Destro Sims here. We know Bonesmith's ahead. This is Renown 35. We know Bonesmith is ahead by a good bit. But this is because, number one, Decimating Bolt having the effect tied to Incinerate is it's just a strong effect. And when you're playing the Roaring Blaze talent, which increases Incinerate's damage, stacked with Decimating Bolt, it's really powerful. It's sort of what we saw with Affliction, with Malefic Wrath, with Drain Soul, with Decimating Bolt, Drain Soul stacking. When you stack all these powerful abilities together, well, normally, as long as they aren't garbage abilities that are irrelevant to your toolkit, you typically have a pretty solid outcome here. And that's what Bonesmith brings. Bonesmith also brings Marrow Gemstones once again, which gives you the actual crit increase. And if this procs at the right time, or if you're able to set up the actual like burst window for 10 seconds with bolts, with whatever, what have you, your Incinerates, you can get an insane amount of burst out in that 10-second window. But look how close Nia is here. This is Renown 35 once again. When I've run Sims on my own, it's pretty close to this. Nia's still really close, and here's Khorane, here's Dreamweaver, but let's be being honest, these Sims aren't optimized for Khorane's Wild Hunt Tactics First Strike degeneracy. We can probably call it that. Once again, Pelagos down here a little bit, or I'm sorry, Venthyr down here a little bit, but they're in a similar spot too, having a subpar ability. Pelagos a bit lower, not as strong as it is for AF, but you can indeed have it Pelagos' ability. But the big thing here, Necro's fine for Destro, but look how good Night Fae is. It's right there. Demonology Sims. Now, Bonesmith is high here. This is number one because the Decimating Bolt ability affects Demon Bolt. for Demonology Warlocks. I will say there is a roughly a 7 DPS difference here between Nia and then Dreamweaver and then Khorane. Look at this difference here. Ameni, Plague Divisor, just lower. Now, there have been the recent Demonology stamina scaling builds that have come out that I don't believe are taken into account with these sims. I personally feel Nightfey is the best covenant for Demonology Warlocks right now, especially with the stamina scaling build. But when you take into account, once again, that Decimating Bolt only affects one target, it's Demon Bolt buff, versus Nia putting up Soul Rot, giving you half a minute of a mastery buff, giving you the four target down application. It just makes it a huge difference. Going to Hectic Ag Cleave here, it's just Nightfey. It's just Nightfey, and technically Khorane even pulls ahead. It's just Nightfey, you know. And this is once again not factoring in the insane stamina scaling and the state of Demonology APLs and everything. It's just Nightfey. So when people say that, hey, Necrolord's good for Destro, yeah, I mean it is. It's solid for Destro. But when you're looking at it from an AoE setting, yeah, you can Havoc Incinerates, which is not bad. It works fine. But when you're looking at it from an AoE setting, or just a universal setting where you're looking at it for every single spec, if you want to play Aff, Demo, and Destro in the raid, I think the winner is pretty clear here. That Nightfey is just your choice. And this is not even taking into account how strong Soul Shape is. Nightfey is the clear winner here. I just don't think it's even very close. Unless you want to play only Destro in a raid. But if you're trying to progress at a serious rate, you're playing all three specs. If we're getting into proposed changes territory for Decimating Bolt, I think a good point to start off with is Destruction. And I don't actually think there are really many changes that Destro actually needs as far as Necrolord is concerned. The relevancy of Decimating Bolt is real, especially in Havoc windows. You can launch multiple Chaos Bolts, have your Incinerates buff for it, Marrow Gemstones up here, launch your Incinerates, and just do an insane amount of damage. Your Incinerates hit really hard, especially when you cast Incinerate way into a Havoc window or way into an Execute window. When we were in LFR a few days ago, I had one hit for 19,000 damage when I launched the Decimating Bolt at the boss at like 5% remaining health. That hit harder than my hardest Chaos Bolt ever hit. I think, especially applying that in a 2-target setting, Destro's actually in a pretty good spot as far as Necrolord is concerned. I don't really think there needs to be a power shift or an ability shift away from Incinerate on its own if they want to keep Decimating Bolt in the same general structure that it is, buffing X ability for each spec. One thing I do think needs to be addressed for Destruction with Decimating Bolt is the interaction with Fire and Brimstone. This talent, it pains me to say talent, but this talent used to be a baseline ability that you could toggle on and off, and also it included Chaos Bolt. That might be a little OP at this point, but still, early in Alpha and Beta, you were able to launch your Decimating Bolts, and they would do anywhere from 200 to 400% increased damage. If you read the tooltip here, it now says 100 baseline, and it goes to a max of, I believe, 200, might be 190, something like that, roughly 100 to 200. But if I change to Fire and Brimstone here, watch the tooltip. 100, it should change. 40, there you go. 100 to 40. They've dramatically reduced the damage that your Incinerates deal with Fire and Brimstone and Decimating Bolt. Now, this row is sort of convoluted in itself because Cataclysm is number one, your only single target ability here. These are pure AoE implications. Cataclysm is cast in single target. It's also cast in AoE, number one for the explosion damage, number two for the actual immolate just application, which leads more charge in, leads to more time in a Havoc window, not having to apply immolate initially. It's just really strong. But it was awesome early in Alpha and Beta, and it felt relevant having Fire and Brimstone be a good shard builder, number one, because it does give you a lot of shard gen in combat. It might not be as much as, say, way deep into an Inferno window, but it felt interesting not having to cast like multiple Havocs to build shards here, or you just launched an Incinerate on like 4 or 5 targets, and you had 2 shards, a shard and a half. And you dealt damage with it. That's the thing. It feels like they want to have Fire and Brimstone just be some odd soul shard builder, because the damage here is also reduced. It's 40% to surrounding enemies, technically all enemies at this point, but the shard gen's already there with Inferno, with Cataclysm, and just Destro's baseline toolkit being Havoc or Reign of Chaos or having your Infernal down. The shard gen's already there. So if we're trying to add that as like the main focus point of Fire and Brimstone, I just don't think it's a good way. It's just not good design. I think FMB's actual damage that it deals to surrounding targets, just targets in general, needs to be increased, and the actual Decimating Bolt damage amp needs to be changed from 40 to something a bit more relevant, because having both these damage reductions just makes the incinerates hit like a wet noodle. And when you have all this shard gen coming in from Havoc windows, conflagrates, incinerates in them, Reign of Chaos, Cataclysm, Inferno, Soul Conduit, whatever you're playing, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Even in PTR, we played this more so for the actual damage, because the bigger build on PTR as far as damage was concerned was this. It was Inferno, Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit. You dropped your Infernal, the tank pulled around it, and you just had insane damage basically every 2 minutes or so with Wilfrids. Your damage was untouchable by pretty much every class in the game because you had just so much. You had so many Infernals down, you had so much charge gen. It felt like you barely even cast your Covenant ability because of the Soul Conduit refunds. Fire and Brimstone just wasn't really that relevant. And welcome to World of RNG, my first Infernal. 10 seconds into the window. But if you're using Fire and Brimstone for the shard gen, I think it's just the wrong place to be. I would love to see a change to this Decimating Bolt to increase the actual damage that Fire and Brimstone gives, or just make it 100%. Don't decrease the damage amp that Decimating Bolt gives when you're playing Fire and Brimstone. It would probably make the talent more relevant when it comes to Mythic Plus. It's not target capped. Neither is Cata or Inferno technically. But it'd be a large, substantial, bursty talent, which you could play in a AoE setting. And hey, the shard at that point would be welcome. It's funny, Demonology early on, Necrolord was hailed as the best covenant for it, and technically it's still being hailed as the best covenant in certain places at this point, although I don't really think it is anymore. I think it's Night Fae. I think it's very, very, very close when it comes to single target. One, due to the Night Fae stamina scaling from Grove Configuration and just the Mastery buff and Soul Rot itself, and number two, because Decimating Bolt does indeed increase Demon Bolt damage. Now, the issue with Decimating Bolt for Demonology, though, is that it's just sort of awkward. Even when you're playing the huge Demonology Decimating Bolt, Demon Bolt scaling build, the one with like Sack Souls, you can basically every row has some kind of ability that can buff Demon Bolt. Sack Souls, you can play Inner Demons or Soul Conduit here for more Sack Souls value. You can play from the Shadows, you can play Power Siphon. Even playing Decimating Bolt, these builds don't hold a candle to demonic consumption. They come nowhere near it, which is unfortunate because the builds are super awesome and really synergistic. Those are typically the ones you see scaling to a crazy amount. Even when you're playing the legendary Balespider's Burning Core, when you're playing all the Demon Bolt increasing synergistic effects, the build is just nowhere near the power level of Decon. Now that's sort of a development issue in itself, but it's like 500 to 700 DPS off of what a mediocre demonic consumption pole can do. Plus, playing this build here is actually the most convoluted, demanding build I ever played in my entire history of playing this game with Balespiders. It is so incredibly GCD heavy, intense, and just not even worth it. It's really disappointing. But like I mentioned, the issue with Decimating Bolt for Demo is that outside of your actual like single target fights where you're wanting to play, you know, your normal single target build, when you get in the plush, you're looking at playing, you know, having a more of an AoE profile with like Implosion and a lot more, you know, pet cleave, whatever, what have you. You're really lacking when it comes to the damage that Decimating Bolt can bring. You really only have honestly just like your baseline toolkit, versus if you go into something like Mythic Plus, playing Night Fae, having Nia with Soul Rot, the master buff, big number one. Number two, you have just Soul Rot's 4-target application. You have so many things that make it relevant in a single target setting, because Night Fae Soul Rot does twice the amount of damage to your main target, and then half the damage to every other like 3 surrounding targets. All that Decimating Bolt's going to do is increase Demon Bolt's damage, which is pure single target. Now, to be fair, this build of Demo playing Born of Blood and things, you're typically swimming in Demon Bolt procs, but it's a 45-second window. Typically, you have enough time to dump them anyway, so there's not really even a crazy amount of synergy there because it's only limited to 3 Demon Bolts. I just sort of feel that a much more relevant way, a much better way to make it more relevant and just better, looking at Demo's like AoE toolkit and not being just so narrow, would be to probably either increase the damage that Hand of Gul'dan does with splash damage for the next 3 casts of hand. Maybe by a pretty substantial amount. You've seen Decimating Bolt go anywhere from 200 to 400% on beta for actual spell damage increases. That would be huge in Mythic Plus. Sniping a pack with Decimating Bolt at the very end of it, moving to the next one, dumping an Implosion with like multiple demonic core procs and just going hand, bolt, Implosion. That's a huge AoE damage increase. That's a huge AoE damage profile. And it fits the actual part of the spec, just the core of the spec and what it does very well. Another thing that you could do is just have it tied to some kind of like pet increase damage wise. I think the best option would probably just be to tie some kind of damage increase to your Dreadstalker's ability. They were buffed in 9.0.5. You also have Dreadlash, you have the FTS Dreadlash interactions. I think that would probably be the best thing universally, either that or the Hand of Gul'dan damage buff. But as far as it being relevant outside of just pure single target fights, which once again, arguably the Knife Edge is better, it just doesn't really do a whole lot. It sort of reminds me of Affliction Warlock. Now, in the nicest way possible, for all my Affliction Necrolord Warlocks out there, I love you guys. You have not truly played an abomination until you've played Necrolord Affliction in this current state. In alpha and beta, it was fun because it dealt a crazy amount of damage. When you had Decimating Bolt with baseline 200 to 400% damage effect, when you had Drain Soul dealing 100% more damage in general and Execute, and you have Malefic Wrath, the legendary, and just random stacking effects, it was okay because you dealt a crazy amount of damage. You think Warrior Execute's big. Nobody touched Affliction Execute. When you had 3 stacks of Decimating Bolt for Drain Soul, when you had the Conduit not giving you a chance to not consume a stack of it, your Drain Souls hit so incredibly hard. But then they started nerfing that build. They nerfed the actual damage Amp Decimating Bolt gives from 200 to 100 and a max of 200. Then they nerfed Malefic Wrath. They actually buffed Wrath, but they nerfed the stacks Decimating Bolt gives, I'm sorry, to Drain Soul from 3 stacks to 1. And then they nerfed the Conduit, and it is like the most gutted. It feels like just a soulless build at this point. Plus, looking at Drain Soul, it doesn't even totally fit Drain Soul's overall utility or application when it comes to Plus, because typically using Drain Soul to snipe shards and Plus, on top of maintaining Shadow's Embrace and just being your main filler, you want to use it to snipe shards at the end of a pack, but at the same time, you want to launch your Decimating Bolt when a mob is low on health. So quite often you'll cast it in Plus, and then you just sit there waiting, because you don't want to drain, because the mob's going to die in a second, so you won't get full drain value, but you want to snipe the shard. So if you snipe the shard before it, then you can't cast your bolt. And it's just this vicious cycle of mediocrity. So the opener that I've been following pretty much as far as playing Aff Necrolord goes, which by the way I do not recommend in any way, shape, or form, is similar to Night Fae. Precast your Haunt to UA, Agony, Corruption, Siphon. You're going to drain the 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace right here. 2, 3. PS, Dark Soul, Decimating Bolt. I'd Ruby a little earlier here than just Dark Glare. And then I'd Rapture. But I also have Lead by Example falling here. So we can Rapture, but then I have to drain to catch this with my Haunt at the same time, and everything's sort of okay here. It's a bit of a convoluted opener because you're having Lead by Example fall. You don't have the full duration of your Rapture window cover with your Drain Soul, but the big thing is catching Shadow's Embrace and trying to maintain it through a full 5-shard Rapture window on top of trying to get the actual value in your Drain Soul without Shadow's Embrace falling. So we've got them coming up in roughly 10 seconds here. You can just maintain dots, give or take a little bit here. Refresh the UA. Corruption's going to fall about, or start hit Pandemic about now. So we'll go Haunt. We'll go Siphon a bit early. We'll even refresh the Agony. Why not? Catch Shadow's Embrace. Launch this Bolt. Let's go PS, right? So we start Rapturing here. Rapture, Rapture. There goes Lead by Example. It's following. I got 3 Raptures left. So now I have to drain right now, or I'm going to lose Shadow's Embrace, but I'm losing Haunt here too. And even at times where you have your Haunt up, you're still losing your dots, so you don't get your full Rapture value in. But you want to drain at 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace because that's a huge damage increase to an already increased Drain Soul. Number 1, this just shows even more that Shadow's Embrace just needs to be removed from this game. Just put the damage back into UA, bring Contagion back. But number 2, the playstyle is just so convoluted. And it reminds me a lot of Beta when we had this because it was 3 stacks of Drain Soul. If you had any mechanic come on you whatsoever in that drain window, your damage was done. It was over. You were done for that pull because you fell behind. You couldn't maintain your Shadow's Embrace outside of your Decimating Bolt windows. You couldn't maintain your dots. You couldn't Rapture. You were shard capped. It's sort of how Aff feels with Necrolord right now. Also, taking into consideration, I lost about 650 DPS. Yeah, I had about a 6,700 DPS sim as Affliction Warlock. I'm at 6,050 right now, roughly, give or take, going from Night Fae to Necrolord. And that's with the same conduits, different Soulbinds, but the same baseline gearing and conduit system. It's just that bad of an ability compared to Soul Rot and compared to having Nia with Grove Invigoration around. There's just that much of a difference. Plus, you have this pure single target profile that all you can do is cast Drain Soul And then when it comes to AoE, you can't really do anything with it. Soul Rock can apply that dot to 4 mobs, and then the Rapture value on 4 mobs. On top of your dots rolling, on top of Vile Tank or PS ticking. The damage profile that Night Fae brings is just so much better than this, even when it comes to single target, as you can see, well, as you can hear by the actual sims that I am sort of lacking damage-wise. The biggest thing I think they can do for Necrolord Aff, it's tough, but I think the best thing they could do is change the spell, the Decimating Bolt effects, if, once again, similar to like Demonology, Demon Destro, if they want to keep the same playstyle of Decimating Bolt increasing X abilities damage. Now, the only real options you have are dot damage or Rapture, pretty much, because you don't really do anything outside of that. So either it increases your dot damage by X for X seconds. I don't think it would be 100%, but hey, at this point, dots don't do any damage in the first place anyways. Maybe they could. Or number 2, they increase the damage of your Rapture. But the thing is, Rapture was already targeted for a nerf in 9.0.5 PTR, and then it was reverted. I would assume because Rapture is the only spell that really deals damage as far as Affliction is concerned. This isn't accurate as far as Affliction is concerned, and they realized, hey, if we nerf Rapture, we're gonna nerf Affliction way too much. That's just a design philosophy flaw. You know, technically your dots do. People want to see dots deal more damage, and I get that. They want to go back to the Legion version of Affliction. I think this version of Aff's damage profile is probably better from a rating perspective and from a Mythic Plus perspective, with the burst E-ish damage that Rapture can bring. Your dots don't technically do all the damage themselves. That's Rapture. But in a sense, your dots do damage because they buff Rapture. So it's this odd profile that we're actually in. You can't really touch Rapture's damage with Decimating Bolt. And if you buff dot damage, it still doesn't really do a whole lot because they buff Rapture. So the Drain Soul Shadow Bolt interaction is interesting. I know they probably want to keep it just, hey, this buffs your main filler. You have Demon Bolt for Destro, for Demo. You have Incinerator for Destro, and you have Shadow Bolt or, well, Drain Soul for Affliction. But I just don't think it has enough universal applications as far as Mythic Plus goes, or even rating on more than one target fights. And Shadow's Embrace makes it a literal nightmare to maintain, especially when you're comparing it to an ability like Night Fae, Soul Rod, where, hey, it's great single target, it's great in AoE. Necrolord has a decent bit of ground to make up, but I do think with some small tweaking, small changes, it could very well be there. Even if it affected your next Rapture or next 2 Raptures, if they're willing to do that, I think it would make a huge difference in the overall playstyle viability, I hate using that word, but it's true, of Necrolord Affliction, and really position the Covenant potentially in a good spot heading into 9.1. Thanks for watching, dudes. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and it gave you all a better look and, I guess, understanding of Necrolord, Warlock, Covenant abilities and things at this point in time. Once again, I do think Fleshcraft in its current state is actually really, really strong. It might not bring the movement utility that Soul Shape does, but a 20k shield with a 45k health pool is actually really, really, really big. With the buff that I got in 9.0.5, I feel that it's been a bit overlooked until this point in time. Destro Necrolord, I think, is probably in a pretty good spot. I don't think much really needs to change there outside of the Decimating Bolt, Incinerate, Fire, and Brimstone interaction. Demonology, I think something needs to be changed. A Hand of Gul'dan buff, or Hand of Gul'dan damage buff from Decimating Bolt would be great. Fits the toolkit pretty well. A dog buff maybe could help there too, with the actual Dreadlash buffs, the legendary, a lot of synergy there. And as far as Aff is concerned, as much as I like the old playstyle, or the old Drain Soul dealing damage playstyle, I don't think it holds a lot of relevancy as far as Mythic Plus is concerned, and not really on a lot of raid fights either. Oh, and Shadow's Embrace needs to go. That's a different video in itself. Any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons see here, you can grab for free off my Twitch. If you guys want to swing by, feel free to do so. If you have any questions, feel free to also drop them in the comment section below here. I will do my best to get back to you. Shout out to my patrons. Thank you all so much for the support, guys. I appreciate it. Once again, the 9.1 Warlock spreadsheet will indeed be going up soon on my Patreon. Tier 3 level, Felguard rank or higher gets early access to that if you're interested in it. Thanks again for watching, dudes, and I will catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.